So I suggested that there is some substance to the idea of human nature, even if by looking at human nature we can't expect to learn everything we might want to know about ourselves. Nevertheless, at least the theory of emotions gives us some guidance as to what we're like. And if you know about human emotions, you know not just about how they behave inside of you, you know about how they behave inside of others. You know that, for example, someone who's angry is likely to be dangerous, either verbally or physically. You know that somebody who's very sad is likely to not have a whole lot of energy, for instance. Somebody who's very afraid is likely to try to go away or in some other respect shroud themselves from something they take to be a threat. This is what's known as Fokt psychology that we have by virtue of just growing up normally in a society and being reasonably attentive to what things happen, how things happen around us. But also it's been reasonably well borne out by large swaths of experimental psychology and social psychology in particular, so that we can look to experiments to help us confirm the idea that there's certain particular ways, distinctive and characteristic ways that people behave when they're in the grip of one of the basic emotions. You might also think about some of the so-called non-basic emotions. I've mentioned pride already in my discussion of Plato's tripartition. Are there emotions, one question is, are there emotions that are distinctive of a particular society? Do you experience emotions that you think are distinctive of society, the society that you occupy, either full or part-time? Some of my sources tell me that, for example, in Japanese, the word that we'd pronounce in English as ame refers to the experience that people have, a kind of state of bliss that a person has when they're lost in a large crowd of people. That's not an experience that I have when I'm lost in a large crowd of people. Bliss is not the first kind of feeling that I have. It's usually something more negative. But other people might feel differently. Now, if that's right, then ame is something that's distinctive of at least Japanese society. And if so, that's something we want to see as building on top of a basic emotion substructure, a thing that is something that perhaps you learn by virtue of being a member of Japanese society or other societies that value that kind of experience. Likewise, I'm told that in Portugal, people have the word saudade, which refers to that feeling of longing and nostalgia for the lost days of the Portuguese Empire. Now, again, I'm not part of society that has much by way of a lost empire, and so that's not an experience that I have much direct access to, but those of you who are involved in the course might have something to contribute by way of whether you've experienced that, perhaps you're a member of Portuguese society, or whether you know people who are, or you're from a different society that experiences that. So if we think about non-basic emotions, they might be specific to a particular culture, or they might be something that is still fairly pan-cultural, but that depends upon a fair bit of cognitive apparatus. So it might be that every culture is one that's capable of having its members experience pride. But pride for one person might be based on something very different from what makes somebody else proud. What is it to be proud? And one question you might ask is, if our nature is such as to have the capacity for pride or shame, guilt, what role do these emotions have in, for example, social life? Does being part of a society in which one person is capable of pride, another person is capable of shame or guilt, does that tell us anything about how the society operates? And is it something that should be promoted, demoted, gotten rid of, taught, cultivated, etc.? So that's one set of questions that I think it's good to discuss. Another one is the following. Even if there's a substratum of basic emotions, and even if on top of that there is some non-basic emotions, such as ame on the one hand and pride on the other, we might also ask, having mentioned the notion of second nature, those things that are second nature to you are, as I've said, by the time you're an adult, they might seem, by introspective means, to be as much part of your nature as anything else. Your capacity to ride a bicycle might seem as basic and fundamental as your capacity to feel anger if you've been riding a bicycle for many, many years. Both might seem fundamental in the appropriate respect. Nevertheless, the bicycle riding was learned, whereas the capacity for anger was not. I want to suggest then that it's part of our nature that we have a lot of plasticity. Our nature is such as to be malleable. Our nature is such as to be shapeable, but only shapeable to a certain degree and up to a certain limit. Just as many of our organs have a degree of plasticity, a degree of flexibility up to a certain time, and then lose that flexibility over time, such as the lenses in your eyes, lenses in your eyes are quite labile and malleable early on in life, and as you get older, those lenses become less capable of focusing easily. So too, aspects of yourself, your nature, might be highly plastic early on. As you grow older, as you become more set, habituated, you might even say ossified, what in the past might have seemed plastic is perhaps no longer. So that idea of plasticity is something that is ephemeral. You can be, even if it's part of our nature to be plastic, it's something that we lose over time after a certain age, after a certain number of sunsets and seasons and so forth, that plasticity tends to go away, which suggests that, especially when you're relatively young, thinking about those aspects of yourself that can be changed, that can be modified, is part of what it is to be a person, I want to suggest. It's one's very nature is precisely to address that degree of plasticity, work within it, and hopefully to improve upon the basic material that you've got to make yourself into the kind of person that you want to be. So if there's a big picture here, it might be as follows. Human nature is not something that we should think of as there to be discerned by a very powerful internal telescope or microscope, but rather there's something there to be discerned, but a great deal of our nature is precisely that plasticity, precisely that openness to malleability. And if we acknowledge that, then I think we'll be likely to see that it's our responsibility and our opportunity to do something with that plasticity and malleability and make ourselves into the kind of people that we want to be. I'm hoping that as we move into the later parts of this course, the second and the third mini MOOC, we'll get more materials to work with to help us think about the kinds of people that we want to be as we introspect, as we learn more about ourselves, in order to have a good set of guideposts to that self-creation, self-shaping, self-cultivation. I'll see you soon.